So good morning again. My name is Reema Gupta, and I'll be walking you through the day's agenda as well as introducing you to the speakers. Before we begin, let me extend a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the conference co-chairs, Dean Rajendra Srivastava, Professor Chirantan Chatterjee, and Professor Anand Nandkumar, as well as the ISB team who has worked tirelessly over the past few months to bring this platform of dialogue to you. I would especially like to acknowledge my colleague Kumar Guru, who could not be here, but hopefully he's watching us on our live streaming. We are streaming this live to our audiences and especially to our students across both the campuses. We also have a Twitter hashtag, and I would encourage, if some of you are Twitterati out here, please use the hashtag ISB IIPC 2018 to start the conversations, as well as the tag has the live streaming link. So if you want to also pass that on to your friends and colleagues who might be interested in this dialogue, please feel free to share it. So I hope you all have a look at the agenda, and I'm assuming that is why you are here today. We have a phenomenal lineup of eminent academicians from across the globe, industry thought leaders, and policymakers from government to explore the theme of innovation, IP, and competition. And we bring this fascinating conversation to you and hope it becomes a platform of dialogue going forward. Before we begin, I'd like to share why this topic is personally very important to me. I recently came across a study by Professor Raj Chetty. How many of you are familiar with this study? And I'm sure the academicians here are all probably familiar with it. He's a faculty at Stanford University, and he and his colleagues worked to analyze the lives of more than 1 million inventors across the United States to understand what factors determine who becomes an inventor in America. And guess what they found? And I think this is very relevant for us because their work is now curated under this title called Lost Einsteins. And they found that women, minorities, and children from low-income families who could have had high-impact discoveries had they been exposed to innovation while growing up. If these groups invented at the same rate, America would have 4 times more innovation than they currently have. So for me, this dialogue is not only about today, but it's about our aspirations for tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to kick off today's session by inviting our Dean, Rajendra Srivastava. He'll talk about the innovation and the role of innovation in a growing and emerging economy like India, as well as the role ISB can play to facilitate this dialogue. Rajendra Srivastava is also a Novartis Professor of Marketing, Strategy, and Innovation. He comes with an experience of over 30 years as an academic and administrator. His three key tenets that he has been talking a lot about over the past few years is applying a multidisciplinary lens in solving complex issues. He talks about practice and theory and how they must come together. And he talks about next practices from the East. And it's not just about copying the best practices from the best, but building our next practices from the East. His current work focuses on business model innovations, especially in services, B2B, technology, and emerging markets. Professor Rajendra Srivastava.
She was asking me if I had a presentation. I have some notes. Reema, thank you so much for that introduction. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome our guests, particularly those who have traveled thousands of miles. And this is not just from abroad, the people from India who've also traveled 1,000+ miles. And all the panelists, all the friends from industry and government, academia. This is a start of what we think is going to be a journey, so we look for continued evolution of what we start discussing today. Today is just merely a starting point. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, and you can see the names out there. But sponsors have been very instrumental in getting this thing going. We have Qualcomm that was involved with us, US IBC. Mint has been very instrumental in in the lead up to this conference in terms of articles that we can write on this issue. And subsequent to the conference, we hope to be able to generate a series of articles that will highlight the the problems that we encounter and what might be possible solutions. So again, big thanks to our media sponsor. Big thanks to CRICSI, to IIPC and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and everybody. And we'll get the ball rolling on this. In terms of why we are having, why ISB got involved in this in the first place. In ISB, we're following 3 principles. And this is a little bit of dean speak, but it is also really an effort to see if we can get other people engaged in this journey. And the 3 principles are balance between theory and practice. And so what we do in the labs, what we do in research, ultimately has to find a way into the marketplace. And so it's one thing to talk about research, it's one thing to talk about labs, but in some cases for ISB, we don't have labs inside the campus. Our lab is actually the marketplace. And that's true because that's the kind of research we do. We're not really talking about invention, we're talking about exploiting the invention and taking it to the marketplace. So one is theory and practice. The other part that Rima just mentioned is this whole issue of can we integrate insights from the West and the East. ISB, by its history, has been very, very biased, if you will, towards the West. But on the other hand, when we look at sort of what has been going on, we look at a company such as Foxconn that is thinking of investing billions of dollars in Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. They must have done something right. We could look at Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, and they've given Intel a run for their money. We could be looking at Hyundai. And there's so much going on in the East, and we must look at coming up with the appropriate frameworks that integrate how we do business in the East and how do we do it in the West. This is particularly important because it's not well understood what the comparative assets are. And why are so many companies, why are so many people really interested in India and at the moment? And frankly, one of the reasons is that we have an asset called the marketplace. And we have more insights about that particular asset, or we should have more insights about that particular assets than somebody who does not operate in India. And that kind of thinking is necessary because if you're going to take ideas from the lab to the marketplace, we can't just think of the lab, think of invention without thinking about the part of innovation and entrepreneurship, which is embedding these ideas into the marketplace. Despite everybody talking about the need for innovation, it is sad that companies like Samsung and Google spend more on R&D than India does. And so something needs to be done to correct that. If you look at the India mobile telecommunications market, we have several players that are big enough, but the technology that we're using, it comes from Ericsson, it comes from Nokia Networks, and increasingly it's coming from Huawei and ZTE. So why, despite having the market, Indian companies are not generating the technology, not being innovative? So we do need the product innovation and not just the service innovation. So we, otherwise, what we end up with is a very small stake in the payoffs, if you will, which brings up this whole issue of value migration. How do we capture value? And it's not just in terms of product, in terms of patents. A lot of the value is frankly there in the brand and in the trademarks, if you will. And how do we capture that? How do we go up the ladder and not simply look at the cost factor? the human cost factor as a way to compete. How do we develop more trust in the marketplace? And that has to be part of our discussion as well. Then there's this whole issue of product innovation versus process innovation. Let me explain what I mean by that. The old example that I used to use is that Henry Ford did not develop the internal combustion engine. That was the invention. What he did develop was the assembly line, which was how do we generate a process by which we can improve productivity. That same kind of logic can be, for example, extended into healthcare. Medical networks like Mayo Clinic or MD Anderson Cancer Center or Sloan Kettering may be doing a lot of very original work in the medical area. But you come to Arvind Eye Hospital, and then you see how we can do cataract operations for less than $20 per person. And think of maybe Arvind Eye Hospital as the assembly line that Ford Motor Company had put in, but we brought it to healthcare. I was traveling a few months ago from Singapore to India, to Hyderabad, and sitting next to me was a surgeon from the National University of Singapore Health Center. And he said he was very envious of his Indian colleagues, and he did liver transplants. So I asked him why, because there's plenty more research resources available, et cetera, in Singapore. He says, you don't understand, Raj. What happens is that if I'm lucky, I get to do one or two operations a month. My colleagues in India are doing one or two every day. So practice makes perfect. So there's value to refining the processes as well, and India can certainly be in a position to capture that. There's a tussle, if you will, between what different bodies involved in the management of innovation do. At one end, we have people who are responsible to ensure competition, and this is really for public good, so to say. And on the other hand, we are looking at the protection of IP assets. And so these are really at odds to each other, because the more we protect, the less is available in some ways to the public. So, and this is just only one aspect that needs to be looked at. But in general, what we have is a situation where we have the innovation, we have the ideas, we have the IP policy, and then we have the competitive makeup. And something is going wrong. And what is going wrong is we've been talking about Make in India as an example, and then we find in the telecom sector that what we're doing is really assembling in India. We're not making very much in India. We need to kind of find out what needs to happen for this sort of situation to reverse. You look at clean energy, and we've made a lot of India has made a lot of commitments to renewable energies, wind and solar. But where's the technology coming from? Except for a little bit that's coming out of India, most of it is coming out of places like Germany and China, particularly China of late. And again, we need to understand why that is happening and why we're not spending enough energy on that front. We can talk about design in India, but we may be designing in India and patenting elsewhere. So that aspect needs to be looked at. Startup India. These are all good thoughts, but are the policies in place that are going to help entrepreneurs get off the ground? It's not just the starting capital they need the elbow room to be able to operate as small companies. There's a lot of complexity out here, because there's a tussle between supply, if you will, and demand. There's the balance that is needed between product innovation and service or process innovation. There's the design issue, manufacture versus assemble. There's the innovation, do we innovate or do we exploit? And so if we are still in, let's say, some industry in generation 3 technology, do we really need to worry about generation 5 technology, or can some benefits be obtained by process innovations to increase productivity and make generation 3 or generation 4 available to everybody? Important to understand what are the assets, what are the competitive assets in place. It's not just IP. it's hard to define IP sometimes because IP may be really expertise in taking things to market, and it's not necessarily IP in the lab. So with this complexity, there needs to be a dialogue between multiple parties, and different parties are going to have different objectives. If we look at the government, they are representing the citizens and the market, and they may look at it with one particular lens, and which is how do we make the product or the idea more accessible, more affordable to the market. On the other hand, you have the corporate sector, which has made the investment, and they're looking for ways to recover and generate benefits for their shareholders and for the employees, in addition to making the products available to the consumers. There's the global pressures. There's the, all that is going in terms of nationalism, if you will, whether it is coming out of the US or it's coming out of China or Australia for that matter. So we have many, many competing interests out here. And so we need to manage at least three levels. One is at the societal level, the government level. The second is at the corporate level, and the third is at the individual level. And very, very different kinds of thinking that come up to it. So it is in this context that we are hosting this particular conference. We are focusing on four major areas that are in the program outline, and one is related to market dynamics and competition economics. That's the first panel. The second panel is looking at the evolution of jurisdiction for the innovation ecosystems, because it's very different. What we're doing today is very different from invention even 10 years ago. The third panel is on the economics of innovation, particularly looking at things like licensing and IPR. And the fourth is on trade innovation and IPR. So these are, as I said, starting steps in these directions. And undoubtedly, out of these panel discussions will emerge multiple ideas that we then need to assemble and see how we can take them further. So I hope an outcome from this conference is actually going to be the laying of the roadmap for what needs to happen. And we hope that more universities will join us, more corporates will join us, and we'll get more support from the government agencies. So again, thank you for coming, and this is a wonderful start. Okay.
Thank you, Raj, for laying the agenda for the day and the framework that we need to build together. The next item on the agenda is the keynote speech by our Honorable Union Minister of Commerce and Industries and Civil Aviation of the Government of India, Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Unfortunately, he could not be here with us today, but he has sent a video recording of his talk, so I'll ask the guys to cue it up and play it for us.
I'm very happy that a good friend, Mr. Srivastava, has organized an event through the Indian School of Business, ISB, on issues related to how do you work on innovation and make the world better than what it is today. If you really look at it, the innovation has always been driving the change in the world. The change is innovation, and innovation makes change possible. Innovating means you have to think differently, you have to apply your mind differently, you have to use different processes, and that will happen when you start, first of all, the beginning of that, when you start thinking differently. And to make it happen, we are now trying to make Skilling India program, which will allow people to think differently. Education system needs to be reformed to fall in line with this. And also we are trying to create skilled manpower which can take over this challenge of the kind of necessary changes we need in terms of bringing in complete transformation into the entire area. Secondly, the Make in India is something which will actually make new ideas to be created in India by manufacturing those products in India. But Startup India is a very interesting program in which we are encouraging 20,000 startups which are there. Only 4-5 days back, I had a meeting in Delhi in which we called all the startups in fintech sector, in healthcare sectors, in some other petroleum sector and other sectors, and call all the regulators on the other side. So startups are on one side, all the regulators on the other side, to find out how regulatory challenges they are facing and how to get over them. Each one of them who were present there told me afterwards, both regulators said it was an educative exercise for me, and those on the other side of startups, they said, we never got an opportunity, so that we go into the regulatory issues at the basic level itself. Because normally somebody will say, it's a regulatory hurdle. But why regulation is there to begin with? And if the regulation doesn't change with the startups, how can the regulation be the harbinger of change? Therefore, we did this, and I'm very happy to say that we'll work on it. I was very keen to participate in this program. ISB is a great institution. I always participated in it, and therefore, unfortunately, I've been traveling. So please accept my regrets, but thank you very much.
So, very interesting video. I myself saw it for the first time, and it's great to see that progress, the dialogue between startups and regulatory, because I think yesterday itself we were having this conversation, and one of the things that we face challenges is the startups say that especially when we are using new technologies, there's no regulation around it, right? And how the regulation is always catching up, and how do we bridge that gap? So it is very fascinating to see that he has, at his level, begun that dialogue with startups, and we hope to see many more such initiatives coming out.